Good evening. My name is Mary Bias, and I am the president of PSC Partners Canada. And together with Ricky Safer, CEO and founder of PSC Partners Seeking a Cure, we welcome you to the third webinar in the post-conference educational series, The Clinical Trial Landscape in PSC, Current and New Opportunities for Patients, with presentations from representatives from 9 organizations, as shown on the slide here. Next slide. This webinar and the remaining educational series, part of the 2022 annual conference programming, have been made possible with the generous support from our sponsors, to the many community sponsors shown here who have been steadfast in supporting the work of PSC Partners. Thank you. Next slide. And another huge thank you to the 2022 annual conference corporate sponsors shown here: Gilead, Pliant, HighTide, Mirum, Escient, Perspectum, Children's Colorado, Chemomab, and our co-hosts of the conference, Brigham Health and Mass General Brigham. And this project is supported by the Chien Zuckerberg Initiative. Next slide.
Hello, everyone. And welcome to tonight's webinar. I'm Ricky Safer, founder and CEO of PSC Partners Seeking a Cure. We're really excited to bring you information on 9 clinical trials, like Mary said, that we have in place for PSC. It's a long cry from 19 years ago when we launched PSC Partners and there was little interest in our rare disease. Thank you to all our speakers for joining us tonight to show us the breadth of the current PSC drug development landscape. Please mark your calendars and join us for the remaining upcoming post-conference educational webinar series. You'll find links to register for these webinars on our events page of the PSC Partners website. Tonight, each speaker will have 6 minutes to explain the basics of his or her clinical trial. I'm excited to hear tonight's presentation, so I'll introduce our first speaker. Dr. Josh Korzenik is an assistant professor at Harvard Medical School at Brigham and Women's Hospital. I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Korzenik.
Thanks very much. I'm delighted to be here and delighted to see so many participants, both in terms of presenters and in terms of in the audience. I think the most important thing, the most important message that I think we can all get across is that we really encourage involvement, participation in trials, whether it's the ones that I'll be talking about or others. I think to move the field forward, we really need people to be enrolled in these trials. So whether it's yourselves, family members, friends, or colleagues, really encourage involvement. And I think that's the most important way of finding therapies and hopefully eventually a cure. Today, I'm going to be talking very quickly about 2 trials that we have, one of which is underway now and one of which will be in the near future, that I'm very excited to share with you and encourage participation. Next, please. So the first one I'll be talking about is called SHIP. I'll be talking about this a little bit quickly because we have a very short time span to get all of our messages in. And I'll be telling you a little bit about it. Both of them will be sort of fairly quick, so I apologize for that. So the first one is repurposing an existing medication. It's an FDA-approved medication. It's a randomized trial to either the FDA-approved medication or placebo. And then there's an open labeled extension. And if it's beneficial because it's out there and approved for IBD, you could stay on this potentially for as long as you would want to. Next, the second one I'll be talking about is something that's not open yet, but it's a very different and novel hypothesis. The hypothesis is that PSC is fundamentally not an autoimmune process. It's an inflammatory process. It's a different conception of the cause. It's really an initial dosing trial that is a very, very safe medication that is approved in a different form. And so that is really something that would be encouraging involvement, really to help us launch a larger set of trials, and I'll be talking about those later. Next. The first medication that I'll be talking about is sulfasalazine in PSC, or the SHIP trial for sulfasalazine hidden in plain sight. Next. Sulfasalazine is a medication that's been approved, that's been around for over 90 years, used for ulcerative colitis and arthritis. And the support for this study comes both from a Japanese retrospective study where 6 out of 10 people on sulfasalazine for other reasons went into remission, including one person who had a liver biopsy before and after and where it was in histologic remission. And the other one was one we did then because of this, and we found 9 people who had been on sulfasalazine with PSC for other reasons, and their PSC had an average reduction of 184 points. Mesalamine, which is used for ulcerative colitis as well, is not effective. And we think this is because mesalamine is metabolized, doesn't get to the liver, whereas sulfasalazine does in levels that we think should be adequate. So there's a clinical response in sulfasalazine versus mesalamine by about 2/3 versus just 12.8%. We have a prospective randomized trial going on. We hope to finish it within about 6 months. Next, please. So this is a randomized trial, 2-to-1 open label extension after. So 2-to-1 meaning 2 people out of every 3 get the drug and 1 gets placebo. We're organizing this so you can enroll anywhere in the United States. We would obtain permission to receive medical records. Labs are obtained locally, and then medications are sent to your home. After 12 weeks of treatment, there's an open labeled extension. We'll share the information with you and your physician about the response. And if there's a benefit, you could use this medication potentially as a regular treatment at the discretion of you and your treating physician. Next, please. This is we're looking at sulfasalazine. So if you have a sulfa allergy or you're already on it, you wouldn't be eligible. It's 14 weeks initially in the randomized controlled trial, and then an open label extension for up to 22 weeks. We would want people with alkaline phosphatase of 1.5 times the upper limit of normal. The age is there, and randomization and program is there. Again, we've organized this so you could enroll anywhere in the United States. You don't need to be near a trial center, and we would work with you to get your record, randomize you, get the medications to you, and monitor you closely. Next, please. The other we're going to talk about just briefly, which is called the Dolphin study. This is a novel treatment with a new hypothesis. This is an FDA-approved medication, but in a very different formulation. It's based on the hypothesis that I mentioned that PSC is not an autoimmune disease, but it's caused by specific metabolites from the bacteria that line the biliary tree and the gut that cause cellular injury in both of these diseases. It may give a unifying hypothesis of why these diseases happen together. And we're providing a medication that's minimally absorbed and serves as a scavenger for these damaging molecules. So we're very excited because we're looking at this in a very different way. And when we look at all the medications that have been tried in PSC, those that are anti-inflammatory, so far, none have worked really to any degree. So we think this is a very different hypothesis. We're starting as a dose ranging study, meaning 3 different doses. Next, please. And we're doing this really anywhere in the United States. This is supported by considerable translational research that we have done, as well as others, showing that there is injury to specific subfractions of the cells in ulcerative colitis, and we're doing the same in PSC. And this is also supported by a recent dietary intervention based on this hypothesis that showed a statistically significant reduction in alkaline phosphatase. So we think this is going to be even more potent.
Dr. Korzenik, excuse me, can you wrap up quickly, please?
Yep, wrapping up now. This can be enrolled anywhere in the United States, dose ranging, initial 8 weeks, and we'll be initiating this in 6 months, and we look forward to talking to you about this more in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Jack Lawler, Vice President, Global Clinical Development Operations, Chemomab Therapeutics. Mr. Lawler.
Great, thanks, Joanne. Appreciate your time. The next slide, please. So Chemomab is an Israeli-based company with a global presence. We're currently engaged in 3 phase 2 studies. Our treatment focus is in rare fibro-inflammatory diseases such as PSC. Next slide, please. In PSC, it's thought that some substances that are released in excess by the body induce movement of various cells towards the liver and its vasculature, leading to inflammation and fibrosis. CM101 is a drug in development that is believed to block these activities, these substances, and thereby limit the inflammation and fibrosis, preventing the resulting liver damage. Next slide, please. In our spring study, we are looking to enroll approximately 93 patients. We are actively enrolling at 37 sites across the US, Israel, UK, Spain, and Germany. We're adding approximately 20 additional sites here in the US. Hope to have those all open by the end of this year. Enrollment is expected to complete by the end of 2023. This study consists of a screening period to assess eligibility. Those meeting criteria are then randomized to active drug or placebo for 12 weeks in a double-blind period. The randomization is 5-to-1, meaning 5 active to 1 placebo. Those patients that complete the double-blind portion will have the option to enroll in an open label portion. And there'll be an additional 33 weeks of treatment followed up by a 15-week safety follow-up period. Next slide, please. Selected eligibility criteria, obviously the age is listed here. We are looking for patients that have elevated alkaline phosphate levels, 1.5 times the upper limit of normal, stable current therapy for PSC, and some exclusions for complexity associated with biliary or bile duct stents are excluded. During this study, the treatment is an IV therapy, so you'll be treated in the clinic for 16 treatment visits if you complete the open label. The other additional contacts will be done by phone. We have sites currently located throughout the US, and we will help you to identify the site that is best suited for your participation, and we will arrange for any transportations or logistics necessary in order to complete those visits. And obviously, like most research studies, we'll be covering the cost of the study drug, treatments and procedures, and you'll be compensated for your time and travel as necessary. As you know, there are no FDA-approved therapies. You will be seen by highly experienced physician researchers in PSC. And again, the information that's gained in this particular study will give us a better understanding of the underlying characteristics and activities related to PSC and potentially may lead to improved outcomes. Joan, I'll let you take it over from there.
Thank you so very much. Very exciting to think about. And our next speaker then, I'd like to introduce Sujal Shah, President and CEO of CymaBay Therapeutics. Mr. Shah, thank you.
Thank you, Joan. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I have a few slides that I'll actually run through rather quickly so that at the end I can go a little bit off script and explain why I'm actually here. I may be the only person presenting today that isn't currently running a study in PSC. But like I said, I'll talk to you a little bit more at the end of my 6 minutes about why I'm actually here. So next slide, please. So overall, our mission and our vision at CymaBay is really guided by opportunities to meet unmet needs and address unmet needs and transform really the lives of people suffering from chronic inflammatory liver diseases, digestive diseases broadly. And at the company at CymaBay, our focus is obviously on developing innovative medicines to improve life. And I'll talk to you a little bit about our lead drug candidate, seladelpar. This mission and ultimately our vision is really around trying to conquer these debilitating diseases and really try everything we can to help patients lead more fulfilling lives without suffering. Next slide, please. So seladelpar is our lead development candidate. It's in a new class of potential drug targets called delpars. And what makes seladelpar unique is that its target is effectively found in every major cell type of the liver. And what we know about that target, PPAR delta, is that upregulating deep PPAR delta really drives the regulation of a host of pathways important in inflammatory liver diseases, including regulation of bile acids, a promotion of lipid metabolism, regulation of inflammation, as well as regulation of fibrosis. So fundamentally, we try very hard at CymaBay to be guided by and follow the science. Next slide. At least today, that science has driven us first towards developing seladelpar for patients with primary biliary cholangitis. Today, we believe, based on what may be one of the most robust late-stage development programs in PBC today, that seladelpar really has the potential to improve liver health and potentially reduce clinical symptoms of disease for patients. In PBC, we have orphan drug designation in both the US and in Europe. We have breakthrough therapy designation in the US and priority medicine designation by EMA in Europe. We recently completed enrollment in a phase 3 global registration study where we expect to have data before the end of next year. And all of that work fundamentally has occurred through relationships both with PBC experts and, importantly, patient advocacy groups around the world. Next slide, please. Now, I show you this slide. This is our phase 3 registration study for patients with PBC. But rather than focusing on the specifics around the study with respect to PBC, I'll tell you just more philosophically about how we think about cholestatic diseases and development in diseases inclusive potentially of PSC, which could be a future development area for us with seladelpar. Response is in a similar way to some of the studies you'd seen earlier thus far in the presentation, a 2-to-1 randomization. That's really to make sure that there are more people on treatment than on placebo, given the significant unmet need. That would be the same whether we're talking PBC or PSC. Our study also includes an open label long-term safety extension. Again, this is a principle I think you'll see repeated across many of the other studies in PSC today, with a recognition that patients need additional alternatives. I'll just wrap up with a couple of other comments. You know, I'm not just here to talk a little bit about CymaBay and PBC and even the potential that seladelpar may carry one day for patients with PSC. That is a future desire of ours. I'm really here, to be honest with you, because of Ricky and Rachel and Joanne and Mary and many of the extraordinary people here at PSC Partners. And if I can just go off script for my last 30 seconds, you know, including all of you on this call, the work that's done by patient advocacy groups in learning, yes, in participating in studies, but in being actively involved in this process, I have to tell you, inspires all of us on this call. It actually inspires those of us that have dedicated, and many on this call that have dedicated many more years than I have towards treatment alternatives for patients with PSC, you know, to not be competitive, but to be thinking about ways we can work together, think about endpoints in PSC, think about better clinical trials, think about advancing care and ways that we can support one another. I have either talked to every single presenter on this call and or someone at their company, despite the fact that we are not currently running a PSC study. And I think that's the case for many of the speakers today. Many have relationships with one another. And I'd simply tell you that much of that is inspired by organizations like PSC Partners. So I applaud everyone here for participating, and I hope that the work you all continue to support, we can do justice by making sure that we continue development in this area.
Thank you so much. Very much appreciated. Our next speaker is Dr. Gideon Hirschfield, Professor of Medicine, University of Toronto, who is representing Escient Pharmaceuticals. Thank you, Gideon.
So good evening, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here today. So many of you know me. I'm a PSC clinician scientist. And today I'm sort of acting as an investigator as part of this clinical trial being run by Escient Pharmaceuticals. And I would echo what Sujal said, is that there is real determination to make new drugs for patients living with PSC. And the trial I'm going to present on behalf of Escient Pharmaceuticals mirrors that interest and determination to use new science to make patients' lives better for those living with PSC. Next slide. So the study I'm going to present, and I am an investigator in Toronto, and there are many investigators around the world in the study. It's called the Pacific Study. And this study is harnessing basic science and a very important unmet need. The three most significant symptoms for patients living with PSC are pain, fatigue, and itch. And this study is focusing on quality of life and focusing on itch. And all of the patients on the webinar tonight will know that itch is one of the worst symptoms of any chronic liver disease. There are no true approved treatment options available for itch caused by either PBC or PSC. And the Pacific Study is enrolling patients with PBC and PSC who have itch to test a new treatment and a new hypothesis. Now, we don't really understand the cause of itch, and there are many ideas as to what triggers itch in patients with bile duct inflammation. One of those important ideas is essentially neuronal activity, and that your nerves are responding to chemical signals, and that those chemical signals are interacting with very specific receptors on the nerves. EP547 is a new oral once daily investigational treatment designed to block this receptor that is binding important molecules that may be causing itch. Therefore, the hypothesis is that EP547 could be an anti-itch drug. Next slide. So the organization of the Pacific Study, Escient, is the sponsor. They are a private biotechnology company. They are developing novel first-in-class therapies for unserviced medical needs. They are working together with LabCorp. As you know, you need a clinical research organization to deliver clinical trials. They are working together with investigators such as myself and other KOLs around the world. There are going to be 50 sites in 8 countries. The sites will include North America and Canada. And there's been input from many people, including patient advocacy groups, including PSC partners. Next slide. The patients involved in the study will be itchy, moderate to severe. They will have both PBC or PSC. So PSC is relevant to tonight. There'll be a screening period. There'll be a placebo-controlled period when some patients get drug and some patients get placebo. Then there'll be 6 weeks where everyone gets drug, and then there'll be 2 weeks off drug. And throughout that, the patients who kindly participate, we will measure their itch score and many other both biochemical and safety parameters. Patient recruitment has started at select US sites and Canada, and additional countries are expected to start first quarter 2023. Next slide. This study is important because everyone will get drug at some point in the open label period. It's relatively straightforward. The study is focusing on itch, and there's no biochemical or liver biopsy requirements. As you've heard from other sponsors tonight, there's a real effort to change the way trials are being conducted, and some visits may be done at home with home health nurses, and patients will be able to connect with site staff via telehealth. There's opportunity for complete virtual study participation. I think people should recognize how novel this is, and you've heard that from other speakers tonight, with all visits conducted at home with a home health nurse. And of course, there is, within the rules of ethics, travel stipends and assistance with travel bookings. Next slide. So we would say, and I would say as an investigator, all patients should consider clinical trials. We need trials to develop new medications. We need drugs for itch, and we need to evaluate them carefully. This study participation will help that. It will help understand a novel mechanism for itch and well-being, and there'll be a significant amount of safety. And your involvement in trials such as the Pacific study will advance the cause of patients living with PSC, with their cause to feel better, function better, and live longer. And I think that brings the end to my 6 minutes and 6 slides.
You did an amazing job. Thank you so much. And now we have Dr. Lisa Boyette, Senior Director of Clinical Development, Gilead Sciences. Dr. Boyette.
Hi, thank you so much, Joanne, and thank you, PSC Partners, for the invitation to join all of you. Like Gideon, I would really like to echo what Sujal said. I think it's an incredibly collaborative field in PSC. PSC Partners has played a leading role in creating that kind of environment for all of us to work together, and has pushed forward so many initiatives that are aiding in our work to do drug development for PSC, such as formulating an ICD-10 code so that we can study the disease, this new effort to put together the WIND registry. So I want to thank all of you as patients for being here. We could not do any of this work if you did not choose to show up and participate in it. And thank you for participating in some of these broader efforts to help us understand the disease better. Next slide, please. So I'm with Gilead Sciences. Gilead has been working in PSC for a decade now. Oh, this is my disclosure slide. Nothing I'm going to show you about our program in PSC has been approved by the FDA. Next slide, please. Yes, we've been working in PSC for a decade now. And we have a large footprint in the liver space, and we're hoping to leverage all of that expertise in liver disease at Gilead to bring new molecules forward in our liver fibrosis programs, and that includes PSC. Next slide, please. So just to kind of show what that looks like in terms of individual molecules that have made it out to help patient populations. As you can see in the kind of sea green, we have a number of hepatitis B programs that have made it to approved drugs, a number of hepatitis C programs. There is hepatitis D work, and our Heplodex molecule has now been approved in Europe. Cylofexor is currently in trials for PSC, and then we have a few other programs coming up, including for NASH. And so the learnings that we generate in each of these trials help us to inform moving forward to the next study. Next slide, please. Cylofexor has been in development for PSC for a few years now. And this is a molecule that works primarily in the GI tract, we think, to cause the cells that line the GI tract to release a chemical called FGF19. And what FGF19 does, one of the things that it does, potentially among several things, is cause the liver to secrete fewer bile acids. And what we saw in our phase 2 study, which is sort of a trial to understand if we might have something to work with here in PSC, we gave Cylofexor to PSC patients for 3 months, and we saw that alkaline phosphatase is reduced, and the more Cylofexor we give, the more it seems to reduce alkaline phosphatase levels. So with that finding in hand, we moved forward. Next slide, please. To a phase 3 study, which is what you've heard referenced tonight as a registrational trial, meaning that if this trial shows us that Cylofexor is doing something positive in PSC, we could go to FDA and EMA and say, we would like to get this drug approved so that people with PSC potentially would be able to take it. This is a 2-year study. People come into the study and they go on either Cylofexor or placebo, which, as you know, is a dummy tablet for 96 weeks. It also has a 2-to-1 randomization, meaning 2/3 of the people in the study get active drug and 1/3 will get placebo. Everyone in this trial has large duct PSC. They may also have small duct PSC, and no one in the study can have cirrhosis. So we're only studying people whose disease has not progressed that far yet. We get a liver biopsy when people come into the study. We collect a number of other measures, but then we get another liver biopsy when they finish the study. And then, like you've heard from another of the other companies presenting here tonight, we have what's called an open label extension, which enables us to collect more safety data, and it gives patients who participated in this study the option to stay on study drug if they would like to do that. And we try to extend those so that until we know whether we're going to move this program forward, people who want to take study drug can keep taking it. Next slide, please. So we actually managed to recruit 419 patients into this study. It's fully enrolled at this point, so we're not bringing anyone new into the study, but it is still active in that we're still following the people who enrolled into this trial. So unfortunately, we can't offer spaces to any of you here who might be eligible for the study because it's full, but we wanted you to be aware of it, and we really appreciate the opportunity to share where we are with the program with this whole group. We're expecting to have key data about whether we could prevent progression of PSC with cilofexor about a year from now. And we want to thank PSC Partners because this study was advertised on their website through last year to help us get enough PSC patients into the trial that we could complete it fully. So thank you for all the things that you do to enable us to do our jobs. And I'm looking forward to the breakout and learning a little more from all of you about what your experience with PSC is like. We appreciate the invitation.
Thank you, Dr. Boyette. Our next speaker is Dr. Leigh MacConell, Chief Development Officer, HighTide Therapeutics. Dr. MacConell?
Thanks, Joanne, and thanks to the organizers for this opportunity. So I'll just briefly introduce HighTide, as we're a relatively new company. Our focus is on metabolic and digestive diseases. And today I will cover our lead compound, berberine deoxycholate, or HTD 1801, which is how I'll refer to it moving forward, which we are developing for the treatment of multiple liver diseases, including PSC. So next slide, please. HTD 1801 is a new molecular entity. It's actually an ionic salt that contains two active ingredients, berberine and UDCA. So each target different downstream pathways, which in combination, we hope will address multiple complex diseases such as PSC. You may not be familiar with berberine. It's been shown either in the clinical space or preclinically to exert anti-inflammatory, anti-fibrotic, and antimicrobial activity, which of course would be very important for a treatment in PSC. It's also been shown to attenuate cholestatic liver injury as well as bile duct injury. UDCA, I'm sure you're all familiar with. While not approved for the treatment of PSC, it is used successfully in some patients at lower doses. And if you've reviewed the updated AASLD treatment guidelines for PSC, which just happened, it now states that patients with persistently elevated alkaline phosphatase or GGT should be considered for UDCA treatment. Next slide, please. HighTide has met some pretty important milestones in terms of moving forward in PSC development. So we've completed a successful phase 2 trial, which was actually recently published in the American Journal of Gastroenterology, if you're interested in the detailed data. We recently held an end of phase 2 meeting with FDA and left that meeting with an agreement to proceed to phase 3. We currently have fast track and orphan drug designations in the US and recently submitted an application for orphan drug designation to the EU. Next slide, please. So this and the subsequent slide provide really top line data in the interest of time from our completed phase 2 study. Again, happy to refer you to the recent publication, which Gideon was a part of. The study evaluated 55 subjects. The primary endpoint was change in alkaline phosphatase at 6 weeks, and that primary endpoint was achieved, as you can see in the lower right-hand panel. We saw a statistically significant decrease in alkaline phosphatase at both doses of HTD 1801 compared to placebo. So if you look at the curves there, you can see this is reflected by both an improvement in alkaline phosphatase with active treatment, but also a worsening over time in alkaline phosphatase with placebo. And this study included patients that had to wash out of their UDCA, since one of the components of our compound includes UDCA. We did see a much larger magnitude of response, about 140 unit per liter reduction in alkaline phosphatase in those patients not previously taking UDCA. So next slide, please. This improvement in alkaline phosphatase was paralleled with a reduction in another marker of cholestasis, GGT, as well as AST and ALT. HTD 1801 was generally well tolerated, the most frequent adverse event being GI related, namely mild to moderate nausea and diarrhea, with no liver-related safety observations being made to date. And that includes in our NASH program as well. So moving forward to the next slide, it was really on the basis of these data that FDA has agreed that we can move forward to a phase 3 program in PSC. So we're very actively collaborating with them on a pivotal study design, which is presented here. And I must say the FDA is very, very collaborative, and you can clearly supportive of and prioritizing, development in PSC. So this study probably looks a little bit different than the others that have been presented so far. We're planning a large global double-blind placebo-controlled study evaluating the effects of 1801 on clinical outcomes in adults with PSC. So this differs pretty significantly from the 2 ongoing phase 3 trials in PSC, in that the primary objective is to evaluate the effect of 1801 on clinical outcomes, so the time to first occurrence of a clinical outcome event versus evaluation of surrogate endpoints such as alkaline phosphatase or histology. The right kind of box there describes our clinical outcomes. We propose a pretty broad composite endpoint, including biliary events, progression of parenchymal liver disease, hepatic events of decompensation such as variceal bleeds, ascites, MELD score of 15, and then end-stage liver disease, liver transplant, or death. Additional efficacy endpoints will include looking at, the typical markers of liver biochemistry, markers of liver function, inflammation, non-invasive markers of fibrosis, importantly, patient-reported outcomes, and an effect on microbiome. And then predictive risk algorithms will also be explored. To be powered appropriately for the study, it's a large study, so we are looking for approximately to enroll 360 subjects. They'll be randomized in a 1-to-1 fashion to receive either active treatment or placebo. We've really carefully reviewed progression rates, looking at natural history studies, as well as the simtuzumab study run by Gilead. The study is anticipated to take about 5 years to complete, but we are including events that occur earlier in disease, such as progression to cirrhosis and ascending cholangitis, and that may help shorten the study duration. I think I'm probably running out of time. If you just quickly go to the next slide, we realize this is a large undertaking, will require significant commitment by patients who agree to participate. We do consider the study design to be as patient-centric as possible, despite the pretty kind of robust assessment looking at outcomes over a long term. And I was going to go into a little more detail here, but I think in the interest of time, maybe we should talk through some of these design characteristics during the breakout. We acknowledge the challenges to a study like this, and during the breakout session, we'd like to get your feedback on the study characteristics listed here. Very interested in your insights on the feasibility, practicality of the study for you as a patient. And as others have said, while we never know which of any of these clinical studies will lead to a treatment for PSC, we do absolutely know that your participation is 100% vital for success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. MacConell. And next we have Dr. John Eaton, Professor of Medicine, Mayo Clinic, who has sent us a wonderful recording. Please begin the recording.
Hello, my name is Dr. John Eaton. I'm a hepatologist at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. On behalf of our entire study team, we would like to thank you for this opportunity to provide you with an overview concerning the oral vancomycin clinical trial for individuals with primary sclerosing cholangitis. Regrettably, I cannot be there for a live presentation. However, we will be very fortunate to have Dr. Denise Harnoy, one of my colleagues at Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville, who is also one of the investigators in this study, who will be available to answer your questions live. This trial is recruiting patients from 3 locations in the United States: Scottsdale, Arizona, at Mayo Clinic is the lead study site, and the lead principal investigator for this trial is Dr. Elizabeth Carey. We're also recruiting individuals through the Rochester, Minnesota Mayo Clinic Center and in Jacksonville, Florida. There are several reasons why this trial is important. First, there's biologic plausibility. We know that there is dysbiosis in individuals with PSC, and that modulating the microbiome may be important in treatment options and the disease pathogenesis. Oral vancomycin, being an antibiotic, has been shown to modulate the microbiome. Additionally, there is a great deal of patient interest in this agent, and there has been a number of smaller short-term studies which suggest oral vancomycin may improve alkaline phosphatase. However, there are limitations in this data as these studies are generally small, have been retrospective, and often lack a control or a placebo group, which is important to have when examining the impact of a particular agent such as oral vancomycin on an endpoint. For these reasons, there is uncertainty regarding the potential efficacy of oral vancomycin in those with PSC, and importantly, uncertainty about its long-term safety. For these reasons, this randomized trial is important. This study seeks to determine the impact of oral vancomycin and its ability to normalize serum alkaline phosphatase levels. We're also examining a number of other secondary endpoints, including changes in quality of life metrics. This study is enrolling adults who have large duct PSC, who have elevations in their serum alkaline phosphatase 1.5 times the upper limit of normal or greater. There are additional exclusionary criteria, some of which are highlighted here. This is a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial where individuals are randomly assigned to receive oral vancomycin or placebo, both of which are taken 4 times daily. Individuals receiving oral vancomycin may expect to have the dose increase during the study, depending upon their response in their alkaline phosphatase levels. There are 5 study site visits for this study, which last 24 months in duration. It is important to note that individuals who are receiving their care at these study site centers can have their study-related activities and appointments coordinated in a manner which aligns with their other routine clinical care. For example, individuals who come to our centers on an annual basis for their PSC or other healthcare needs can participate in this study while adding only 2 study visits during this 2-year period. In between study visits, there are local laboratory tests which are obtained in addition to phone calls. Our goal is to recruit 102 individuals, and thus far we've enrolled 63. That leaves us with 39 additional opportunities to participate. There are several reasons why this is a patient-friendly study. Number one is a relatively few number of study visits, particularly when you compare this to other industry-funded studies. There are frequent phone evaluations in between to minimize travel and the burden of coming to the study center. We're looking at endpoints which are minimally invasive and involve laboratory tests, but do not require invasive testing such as a liver biopsy. Also, we recognize it's important to assess quality of life metrics in any clinical trial involving therapies for individuals with PSC, and we are doing that here as well. Why participate in a clinical trial? In short, you will be helping others and possibly yourself. Each participant can make an enormous difference. As we know, PSC is rare, safe, and effective medical therapies are lacking. Therefore, well-designed clinical trials such as this are absolutely essential to further our understanding of this disease and also to identify future effective therapies. Without such trials, effective medical therapies for PSC will continue to be lacking. Thank you for your attention. If you're interested in learning more, please do not hesitate to contact us at any time by phone or email.
Well, I'd like to thank Dr. Eaton, and I'd also like to mention that Mayo will be having a breakout room that will be hosted by Dr. Denise Harnoy. So some of you, I'm sure, will want to join that room. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Elaine Chien, Vice President, Clinical Development and Medical Safety at Mirum Pharmaceuticals. Dr. Chien.
Thank you so much, Joanne. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for your interest in learning more about research today. And a special thanks to PSC Partners for inviting us to come and talk about Mirum's work in PSC. Just to echo what others have said, we're so honored to be part of this community that's so dedicated and collaborative. Here at Mirum, our PSC research program gives us a rare opportunity to make a remarkable impact on this disease, which does not have a known cure, at least not yet. Next slide. It's my pleasure to tell you about who we are and our commitment to the patient communities we serve. Mirum's a global company based in the San Francisco Bay Area with more than 160 incredibly passionate employees and growing. We're committed to ensuring the voice of the patient, their families, and advocates are prominent as we develop new therapies and bring them to the market. Next slide. Mirum's a rare disease-focused company with our current pipeline and expertise focused on cholestatic liver diseases. This pipeline consists of Livmarli, or maralixibat, which was approved by the FDA last year for the treatment of cholestatic pruritus in patients with Alagille syndrome. This was a really exciting moment for us as Livmarli represented the first and only approved treatment for Alagille syndrome, which is a rare disease affecting more than 2,000 children in the United States. We've also applied for an approval of Livmarli with the European Medicines Agency, and we hope to hear back by the end of this year. Our ongoing Livmarli studies are currently focused on pediatric rare liver diseases with trials underway in PFIC and biliary atresia, and our volixibat studies underway are focused on rare liver diseases affecting adults with PSC, of course, ICP, and PBC. Next. So with that, I'd love to share more with you about our volixibat program and our ongoing studies, particularly the Vista study for PSC. Next. So volixibat, which we're studying in this trial, is an ileal bile acid transporter, or IBAT inhibitor. Because Livmarli, which was just approved, is also an IBAT inhibitor, the studies that were done with Livmarli give us a good example of how IBAT inhibitors can benefit cholestatic liver diseases. And with this understanding, we believe there's a strong rationale for an IBAT inhibitor like volixibat to address PSC. So what are these IBAT inhibitors and how do they work? IBAT inhibitors block a transporter in the small intestine responsible for recycling bile acids to the liver. So this process is called enterohepatic circulation. This means more bile acids come out in the feces, and over time, bile acids in the serum are reduced. Our own Livmarli data have demonstrated that IBAT inhibitors can reduce serum bile acids and itch, and provide benefits in other quality of life measures that are really important and impactful to patients' lives. Next. So as we're seeking to help patients with PSC, it's really important to understand and appreciate the holistic impact of this disease. The data here on this slide capture survey results that were collected in partnership with PSC partners and gathered insights from patients as to how PSC impacts their daily lives. You'll notice right away that really high numbers for itch, unsurprisingly, but you also can notice that there's a very high incidence of mood changes and disruption to daily lives caused by unrelenting itch, which is, of course, a very, very big deal. Next. So with that, let's talk now about our Vista's phase 2b study. In Vistas, we plan to enroll about 45 patients during the first part of Vistas, where we will study 2 different doses of volixibat against placebo. We'll then have a blinded interim analysis, and this means the committee will review our data to choose the best dose. This is going to be chosen based on benefits versus side effects that we see. And this best dose will be studied then against placebo in the last 75 patients. Importantly, after 28 weeks of dosing, and similar to many of the other studies mentioned before, all patients will be eligible to get volixibat for up to 2 years. What are we hoping to learn? We'll be looking at the change in itch over the 28 weeks of treatment. We'll look, of course, very closely at safety and tolerability, and look at markers of PSC disease progression, such as liver stiffness, various fibrosis markers, and several types of PSC risk scores. Importantly, at no point during our study will a liver biopsy be required. Next. We are exceedingly grateful to the patients and doctors who participate in our research, whether it's surveys or clinical studies, because it truly helps to advance our understanding of the disease as we look to identify treatment options that can have a meaningful impact on the lives of people living with PSC. In short, none of these new drugs are discovered without patients and doctors. So thank you all for all that. Next. We at Mirum were really pleased to have designed the Vista study with input from the greater PSC community. And this includes people living with PSC, advocacy partners, and physician experts in PSC. Ensuring a safe environment where patients in our study are receiving the best possible care is absolutely paramount to us. We also know it can be really burdensome to travel to the trial sites, so we've ensured that many study visits can be conducted remotely. We also want to further alleviate the burden on patients in general by helping to defray costs associated with traveling to appointments. And of course, we want to ensure that there's a long-term extension available to continue treatment for those who would like to do so. Your health and safety is our top priority, so anyone in the study will have expert care and close monitoring throughout the study. Next. So just to wrap up, thank you so much for allowing me to share a bit with you about Mirum and our passion for PSC. We would be really remiss to not express our profound gratitude to PSC partners and the community in general. You're all so inspiring to us, and we're really honored to be on this journey with you. Next. And thank you for your time. And if you could just advance one more quick slide, apologies. Our legal department makes us depict this, but I am all finished. Back to you, Joanne. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Chien. And to close our presentations, we have Dr. Richard Pencek, Senior Director of Clinical Development, Pliant Therapeutics. Dr. Pencek.
Thanks, Joanne, and a big thank you to PSC partners, as well to everybody on the call today. As you can see, there's this, given all these presentations, there's really a rising tide of clinical research for patients with PSC. But none of this moves forward without your active consideration of actually participation in research. And that is an important driver of all the work that you'll see here today. So before I start talking about the study, next slide, please. I just wanted to give a brief introduction to Pliant. We are a relatively new kid on the block. We are a small biotech company based in South San Francisco, and we are currently developing multiple different potential drug candidates for a variety of diseases. However, our most advanced programs are with the PLN 74809 compound, which I'll be referring throughout the presentation as 809. And the most advanced clinical work we're doing right now is in both idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, which is a rare fibrotic lung disease, and primary sclerosing cholangitis, which is currently also in phase 2 of conduct. Next slide. So if you go to the NIH website, the text you see at the top is how they define PSC, with it being a disease in which bile ducts inside and outside the liver become inflamed and scarred, eventually narrowed and blocked, leading to a bile acid buildup and a persistent injury to the liver that causes further liver damage. Now, why we're evaluating 809 for this therapy, or for this disease in particular, is that injured bile ducts in PSC generate signals. One of those is called TGF-beta. Under normal conditions, this would be part of the repair process for any damage. But with the persistent signaling and activation of this pathway, with the injury that goes on in PSC, this leads to excessive scarring, blockage of bile ducts, and an eventual onset of fibrosis with the potential to advance to cirrhosis. 74809 is designed to prevent cells, essentially to inhibit this signaling process and prevent kind of the damaging overflow that's associated with this pathway. Next slide. So to evaluate this in the clinic, we are conducting the Integris PSC study. This is a randomized placebo-controlled dose-ranging study. You can see the graphic here on the left. We are going to evaluate a series of doses, including 40, 80, and 160 milligrams. And patients will be treated with one of these doses and compared to other patients who are being treated with placebo. Due to the multiple doses in the study, we are actually going to be randomizing patients in such a way that randomization, as you've heard from a few of the other presenters, will be done at a 3-to-1 ratio. So for every patient that is randomized to placebo, 3 will be randomized to treatment with 809. And the study itself consists of 8 visits over a period of about 22 weeks. And I'll provide a little more detail on that breakdown. Next slide. So In terms of overall study objectives, the primary objective of this study is to evaluate the safety and tolerability of patients treated with 809 over 12 weeks compared to those who were treated with placebo. Secondary endpoint, we will look at pharmacokinetics or concentrations of 809 that appear in the blood with dosing. And finally, we will look at exploratory endpoints largely related to liver health, markers of anti-fibrotic or anti-scarring activity, and bile flow. In addition to that, we will also look at patient-reported outcomes, so questionnaires kind of asking you about your activity, your daily life, the burden of the disease, how you're feeling about it, and then symptoms such as pruritus and fatigue. Next slide. In terms of how we're looking at exploratory endpoints to look at the activity of 809, these are really broken down into two categories. The first of which being biomarkers and blood tests, and then also imaging work. So the blood markers will consist of exploratory markers looking at scarring or fibrosis, the ELF score, which is a good marker of disease severity. Some of you may have heard of that, but it's a relatively new marker, but it's a reasonably robust marker of severity in PSC. We will also be looking at concentrations of bile acids. On the imaging end, we will be using FibroScan to look at liver stiffness, and we will also be looking at MRI imaging or MRCPs, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. Next slide. In terms of questionnaires, the questionnaires are really going to focus in on symptomatology, so fatigue and itch, and again, quality of life. So really kind of asking about occurrences of your daily activity, how worried you are about the disease, and feelings built around those kind of considerations. The study procedures, it's a relatively short study. Again, it's approximately 3 months of treatment with 8 visits over 22 weeks, kind of counting the screening period, so before treatment, and then the follow-up period after the 3 months have been concluded. Home health options are available, especially in the modern COVID conditions we've been living through. We realize that this is almost a requirement for studies these days. These are available for the study with exception of imaging visits, which we need patients to come into the clinic for if they are participating in those measures. Next slide. So eligibility, really this does require a detailed medical history and medication review, but patients may be eligible for the study if they have their diagnosis of PSC, are 18 to 75, if they have fibrosis, but have not yet progressed to cirrhotic liver disease, and then other major causes of liver disease or other major conditions related to kidneys, cardiovascular, or cancer would be exclusionary from the study. Next slide. Finally, just to kind of give a status update of where we are going to evaluate doses of 40, 80, and 160 milligrams. Right now, the 40 milligram dosing cohort has been completed, and we are actively enrolling the 80 and 160 milligram groups. And with that, that's all the information I have on the study today. And again, as I said at the beginning, thank you all very much. None of this happens again without your initial consideration of participation in research work. So again, my wholehearted thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pencek.
Thank you so much for joining this webinar. PSC Partners has resources that will help you stay informed on clinical trials and studies in PSC. First, join the PSC Partners Registry at pscpartnersregistry.org. Any participant in the PSC Partners Patient Registry will be notified if they are a possible match for a study or a trial that is recruiting and asks for PSC Partners support. If you are a potential match, you will receive an email in your inbox from the registry with information. It is then your choice if you wish to contact the study coordinator to inquire further. Secondly, any participant in the PSC Partners Patient Registry will also receive periodic newsletters from the registry, the Viaduct. These newsletters are focused on clinical trials and study news, and also the impact from the registry. We share publications related to de-identified registry data, through the newsletter. If you are not in the registry, please consider joining. The registry team is available at any time to answer any questions or concerns you have. The registry is reviewed annually by an IRB, an ethics review board, to ensure that patient private health data is safely secure in a HIPAA-compliant environment, and that the patient consent is accurate to how the data is being used. No identifying information ever leaves the registry. The registry site also has the following pages that are publicly viewable to all. If you navigate to the registry site at pscpartnersregistry.org, go to the Resources tab, and then select Clinical Trials Ongoing, you will find comprehensive resources to find ongoing clinical trials and studies. We include both the links to the clinicaltrials.gov listing and links to any material that the sponsor has provided, such as a study site or a recruitment flyer. These will have contact details to get more information about each trial. On this page, there is also a link that will do a search on the clinicaltrials.gov page for all studies on PSC that are actively recruiting. And there is also a link to an interactive map of these trials that you can explore to find studies near you. The second public resource that is currently being built out on the registry site is a listing of peer-reviewed publications related to the clinical trials we have listed. For example, we currently have, under the Mayo Clinic trial, a comprehensive listing of the publications to date released related to the use of oral vancomycin in PSC. Under the Gilead trial, you will find 2 publications related to the phase 2 data on the Gilead drug currently being tested in the phase 3 trial. We know not every patient is interested in reading medical literature, but many are, and it is part of the PSC Partners mission to support and educate. Please reach out to us at registrycoordinator@pscpartners.org for any comments or questions about the registry, clinical trials, or these resources.
I'd like to give a huge thank you to all our presenters tonight. It's so promising to see all the clinical trial interest in our rare disease. You have all offered us so much hope. And thank you to our large group of attendees who are eager to learn more about the clinical trial opportunities available in our community. To all our patients with PSC, if you haven't joined our registry yet, please think seriously about joining now and helping us move research forward. By joining the registry, you'll be the first to learn about new clinical trial opportunities, and you'll be contacted by the registry staff if you might fit the inclusion-exclusion criteria for a particular clinical study. I hope that tonight's webinar will encourage more PSC patients to consider participating in a clinical trial. Help us find new treatments for PSC and eventual cure. So I'd like to review a few quickly future events. Feel free to go back to our website, pscpartners.org, join the patient registry. As I said, we also have a mentor program, listen to our monthly podcasts, visit the website for updated COVID-19 information, sign up for our mailing list if you haven't already, and follow us on social media. For Canadians, also visit pscpartners.ca. We will be having some webinars coming up. We're going to be rescheduling 2 that had to be canceled for illness. We have the future of PSC and management with a focus on symptoms, complications, and cancer prevention on October 12th. And we're going to be starting a series on embracing diversity in PSC. The first one will be in October. We will set the date very soon. We will be continuing our support groups, the Zoom rooms, all from 6 to 7 p.m. Mountain Time. For spouses, caregivers, and parents, September 28th. Virtual game night for teens is October 6th. Patients with PSC and post-transplant, October 25th. One more reminder, we're still doing our fundraiser Walk 83.01. All money raised goes directly to research. If you haven't donated, you still have time. September 30th, it will be the end of this campaign. And Then I would like to tell you that we have a survey, as always, an exit survey. If you'd like to fill out the survey tonight, please click on the QR code here. Otherwise, tomorrow morning, we will have the survey in your inbox. And last thing, I would like to thank all our sponsors, both community and corporate, for helping us support this effort. And thank you all again once more for coming tonight. Really appreciate it.